A guy by the name of Yuval Noah Harari. You may have heard of him.
Super cool.
He's written 13 bestsellers, sold millions and millions of books. He's invited to speak at all sorts of conferences around the world. He is the top advisor to the World Economic Forum on forecasting the future, and he's a big man with transhumanism and all the rest of that, as the digital takeover of the world and robots and blah, blah, blah. He's also himself a very open gay man. And he said, it's interesting, in a recent interview, there is no creator with specific intentions for humanity and their behavior. And that's where he really comes. People are free to live as they wish. Nothing in nature has a purpose, and nothing that exists is unnatural. And then he said, therefore, we should celebrate the LGBT community because there's nothing unnatural. In fact, his advice was, he said, we should hack our biology to help us advance. In other words, homosexuality, transsexuality, these are all advancements in our evolutionary process, and what we need to do is actively hack ourselves. So it's not suddenly top and bottom surgery to make myself look like a woman, but it's basically a hack. But once you begin to vary from God's truth, you cannot help but begin to amass a huge amount of contradictions in your own mind. And that's why we find we're living in a culture that's so confused about the simple and the most obvious things, who are so easily taken in by sophistry.
That's a really good message.
That they don't understand that it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. And the reason the Bible is so powerful and so effective in our life is because it makes sense. It explains why the world is the way it is. It explains why the world is moving in the direction it's moving. But you see, as Paul said to the Romans in Romans 1:22, that they profess themselves to be wise, but they have become fools in the process. But if we begin with the creation, which God creates everything out of nothing, he didn't have to have a primordial ooze to bake or cook or stir in order to get you to come out on the other end. He started with nothing and he just spoke it into existence, which really makes as much sense and maybe more sense than the idea of it simply being baked in a kiddie's oven to produce some kind of primordial thing that looks like you. But the whole point is that the world was composed, he tells us even in this opening statement, of the three things that we very colloquially refer to as the essence of life in this world. We talk about how we have time, we have space, and we have matter. God says, in the beginning, that's time. He even tells us that he created the dynamic of time. Then he goes on to tell us that he created matter, the earth, and he created space, the heavens. So that in a very real way, when somebody says, well, I don't believe in that primitive cosmology, what they don't recognize is that there's nothing primitive at all in the way it specs itself. It may not use our learned vocabulary, but the simple fact is it's describing a real place and real time. Additionally, both the book of Genesis and Revelation repeatedly refer to God as the one and the only one, the original cause of everything, the creator of what the Greeks referred to as the cosmos. The cosmos. It's where they get it from the word cosmio, whereas we get our word cosmetic and cosmology. And it literally means to arrange, to adorn, to make orderly. An orderly arrangement or a decoration. In other words, he created a universe that had order and beauty mixed together. And lastly, Paul goes on to remind us in Colossians 1:16 and 17. He says, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before or above all things, and in him all things consist. That basically covers everything. Now, from the most ancient times, men have understood and accepted this is an obvious reality.
Amen, brother.
All they needed to do was look around them and see that the universe or the cosmos is not random and nor is it chaotic, but it's an orderly, sensible, predictable place. It's marked by recognizable things like beauty and governed by natural and consistent laws. Now, it's not coincidental that 1799 or 98 is considered to be the beginning of the modern mind. And the modern mind, or what they call the Enlightenment, was this era in which suddenly they said, we've been governed by life's definition from a biblical point of view, but we're going to now interpret it based solely upon science, of which we know very little. But we're going to base it on that, and if it can't be defined by its material essence, in other words, if you can't touch it, if you can't taste it, you can't feel it, you can't see it, you can't digest it, well then we don't know that it's real because we just don't believe that there's anything outside of what our sensory perceptions can experience. And that began the idea of what we call materialism, a materialistic view of the world. They also called it enlightenment and also rationalism. All these different terms that they gave to the idea to really kind of convince you, because if you want to sell something, you have to come, really with a terminology. You have to be a jargon that you use so that other people have to learn your jargon to be able to talk to you. That's called medical school. But the whole, so you have appendages, you don't have toes. And I think that can be really misleading. Because I remember when I went to the doctor and said, well, we're going to need to do a digital exam on your prostate. And I thought, I'm into computers. I have no problem. They didn't tell me that this was a digit. I said, that's not a digit, that's your finger. So deceptive. But basically, Mark was arguing that everything that happens gradually. There's a natural, gradual, biological mechanism. And he even went so far to say that apes were mankind's ancient ancestors. Now, what's really interesting to that, if you go to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., they'll have a display of the evolution of man. And in that, they'll tell you how the chimpanzees and humans share 98 to 99% of the same DNA. The problem is that since 2007, they know that's hugely inaccurate. Today, especially when talking about the sexual aspects of a chimpanzee versus American, the difference is 20%. The only place where it's still 1% is in politics.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all notifications so you never miss an episode or live event. God bless you and your families.